It all started so perfectly. I had a great job, a loving wife, and a home we'd built together. I thought we were solid, that we were a team. From the outside, everything seemed flawless. We shared a life that felt like it was meant to last forever. I never once doubted her or our relationship. She was everything to me: beautiful, smart, and the kind of woman I thought would always have my back. She was my partner, my best friend, and I trusted her completely. For a long time, it was just the two of us against the world. But somewhere along the way, things began to change, and I started noticing little things. At first, I brushed it off. Life gets busy and people get tired, right? I told myself that maybe I was just overthinking things. She started coming home later from work more often, staying late at the office, attending more meetings, but it didn't raise any immediate red flags. I had a lot of trust in her. Maybe she was just working extra hours, trying to prove herself at work. After all, we both had demanding careers, and sometimes it felt like there was never enough time in the day. Then it became more than just the late nights. There were small changes in her behavior, nothing obvious, but enough to make me feel like something wasn't right. She started spending more time on her phone, texting and scrolling through social media for hours, even when we were supposed to be spending time together. It wasn't that she was being secretive about it, but I noticed she became a little more distant. The conversations that used to flow effortlessly now felt forced. The laughter, the easy banter between us was starting to fade. I tried to ask her about it a couple of times, but every time she'd brush me off with a quick excuse: work stress, nothing to worry about, just needing some alone time. And like an idiot, I believed her. But as time passed, those little moments added up. It was hard to ignore how distant she had become, how absent she seemed even when she was physically right there in front of me. I would reach for her hand and she would pull away, not in a harsh way, but enough to make me feel like she wasn't really present. I thought maybe it was just a phase, or maybe I was being too sensitive. After all, we were both working so much, and life had a way of overwhelming us sometimes. But then, something inside me snapped. I don't know what exactly triggered it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was this gut feeling I couldn't ignore anymore. I started questioning everything. The little signs, the late nights, the secretive behavior, what if they meant something more? I couldn't put my finger on it, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. And I was terrified of what that something might be. One night I decided to follow her. I didn't want to, but the doubts had been eating at me for so long, I couldn't help myself. I needed to know. I convinced myself that if everything was fine, I'd feel better, but deep down I was bracing myself for something I didn't want to see. That night, I followed her when she left the house for what she said was a late meeting. It wasn't about mistrusting her, it was about needing to know the truth, whatever it might be. What I saw shattered everything. It hit me like a ton of bricks one evening when I decided to follow her. I didn't want to, but something inside me told me I had to know the truth. For days, weeks even, I had been plagued by this nagging feeling that something wasn't right, that there was more going on than what she was telling me. I tried to ignore it, tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, that I was imagining things. But the more I tried to push those thoughts out of my head, the more they seemed to haunt me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, and the constant unease only grew with each passing day. Something told me I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and the truth was waiting for me below. I just had to take that leap to see it. That night, she left the house like any other evening, dressed up in a way that seemed a little too polished for a casual work meeting. It was subtle, but I noticed. There was a difference in the way she put herself together. She had this look in her eyes, something I hadn't seen in a while, and I felt this irrational urge to follow her. I wasn't proud of it, but I couldn't stop myself. The doubt had taken over, and there was no way I was going to sit back and pretend everything was fine when I felt in my gut that it wasn't. I followed her from a distance, not knowing exactly where she was going, just trying to keep a low profile. I kept my distance, staying far enough behind so she wouldn't notice me, but close enough to see where she was headed. My heart pounded in my chest as I drove, barely keeping up with her car. I told myself I was just being cautious, that this wasn't about mistrust. But deep down I knew this was crossing a line, and I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was happening. The trail led me to a fancy restaurant on the other side of town, a place I'd never seen her mention before. I parked a little further down the street and watched as she entered the restaurant, glancing around before disappearing inside. I waited, my mind racing with a million thoughts. Was she meeting someone for business? Was she out with a coworker? I wanted to believe that, but everything inside me screamed that something was off. It was the way she acted, the way she had been pulling away from me for weeks. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. And then, just as I started to think maybe I was overreacting, I saw him. Her boss. The man I had trusted, the one I'd thought of as a friend. I watched as he walked into the restaurant, greeting her with a hug. My stomach dropped and a wave of nausea hit me. I had to force myself to look away, but I couldn't. I watched them sit down at a table, close enough that I could see their faces. They were laughing, talking like everything was normal. But there was something different about it, something intimate about the way they were interacting. It wasn't just a casual meeting, it was something more. The way they leaned in close, the way he touched her arm, it was all wrong. The man I had thought of as a friend was the last person I would have expected to be part of this. I wanted to confront them, to walk in and tear everything apart right then and there, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Part of me was frozen in disbelief, unable to accept what I was seeing. I sat there stunned as the reality of it all settled in. My wife, the woman I had trusted with everything, was sitting there with him, smiling, as if nothing had changed. I felt like I was suffocating. The betrayal was too much to process, and yet I couldn't look away. My whole world was crumbling, and I had no idea what to do next. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. A few days later, my wife came to me, and her face was pale. I could tell something was wrong the moment she walked in. There was this heaviness in the air, this thick tension that made it hard to breathe. Her usual confidence was gone, replaced by this uncertain, almost guilty look that made my heart race. I had no idea what was coming, but I knew it was something bad. My mind was already racing, trying to piece together what could possibly be going on, but nothing could have prepared me for what she was about to say. She sat me down and I noticed her hands trembling, something I'd never seen from her before. I could feel my chest tightening, a growing sense of dread settling over me as she took a deep breath. The silence stretched on for a few seconds before she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something," she began, her eyes avoiding mine. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." I had no idea where this was going. At first I thought maybe she had been feeling overwhelmed at work, maybe something personal had happened that she was struggling with. I was wrong. So wrong. She finally looked at me, and the words that came out of her mouth were enough to tear my world apart. "I'm pregnant," she said. My blood ran cold. I froze, not understanding what she meant. Was this some kind of joke? Was she messing with me? But then she dropped the bombshell, and it's not yours. It's my boss's. The words felt like they came from someone else's mouth, like they were echoing in my head, but I couldn't make sense of them. She was pregnant, but with another man's child. Her boss's child. My heart slammed against my chest as I tried to process it. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Everything I thought I knew about our life, about our marriage, suddenly felt like it was slipping through my fingers. She tried to explain, to tell me how it had happened, but I couldn't focus on anything she was saying. All I could hear was the pounding in my ears, the buzzing of disbelief. The tears started to well up in her eyes, and she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't touch her. Everything about that moment felt like it was suffocating me. She was pregnant with his child. The man who had been a part of our lives for years, the one I trusted, the one I thought was a friend, had been sleeping with my wife behind my back. How long had it been going on? How could she do this to me, to us? She kept apologizing, begging for forgiveness, telling me that it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. But nothing she said made any difference. She had betrayed me in the worst possible way. The man I'd always thought was my friend had taken what was mine, and she had let it happen. I felt sick to my stomach, like the ground beneath me had been ripped away. I wanted to scream, to shout, but I was too stunned. I just sat there completely numb. I kept staring at her, trying to make sense of everything, but all I could feel was this unbearable weight pressing down on me. This wasn't the woman I thought I knew. She wasn't the person I had built my life with. She was someone else now, someone I didn't recognize. She begged me to understand, to give her another chance. But all I could think about was the betrayal, the lies, and the fact that she had carried on with him for so long. How had I missed it? How had I been so blind? The anger started to boil inside me, and I could feel it rising, a wave of fury that threatened to consume me. But I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to process the betrayal, the crushing reality that everything I had known was a lie. All I knew was that this was the end. I didn't know how I could ever look at her the same way again. The woman I loved had destroyed everything in an instant, and I didn't think I could ever forgive her. I won't lie, at first I wanted to hurt her the way she hurt me. I wanted to get back at her, but not in the way she'd expect. I wasn't going to beg her to stay. I wasn't going to play the victim. Instead, I focused on getting even. I started by documenting everything. I knew her boss was a powerful man, someone who thought he could get away with anything. But I wasn't going to let him. I wasn't going to let her get away with it either. I wasn't just going to sit back and let my life fall apart while they carried on as if nothing had happened. If they thought they could betray me without consequences, they were wrong. I started by gathering evidence, anything I could use to expose them both. I knew I needed to be smart about this. I couldn't just walk in and confront them. I had to make sure I had everything I needed to ruin their lives. I spent hours going through her phone, sifting through texts, emails, and anything else that could give me something to hold over her and her boss. It felt like I was becoming a detective in my own life, piecing together the secrets they'd tried so hard to hide. There were pictures, messages, plans for late-night meetings, and hints at something much deeper than just an affair. The truth was staring me in the face, and with every new discovery, I felt my rage grow. But I didn't act on it immediately. I took my time building a case against them. I needed to make sure I had everything locked down, every piece of evidence in place. I reached out to some of her coworkers, digging for more information. It wasn't just about getting back at her anymore. It was about making sure they both paid for what they'd done. I didn't want to just hurt her, I wanted to destroy everything they had, every shred of power they thought they held over me. The more I dug, the more I realized how deep this affair went. It wasn't just a moment of weakness, a one-time mistake. This had been going on for months. The trust I'd placed in them both had been shattered beyond repair. My wife wasn't the woman I thought she was. She wasn't even close. And her boss, he wasn't just some innocent bystander. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he was using his position to take advantage of her. They were both complicit in this betrayal, and I wasn't going to let them walk away without facing the consequences. I had one thing in mind: exposure. I wasn't going to just confront them face to face. That wouldn't be enough. They needed to feel the weight of their actions, to understand that there were real consequences for what they had done. I knew her boss had a family, a wife and kids who had no idea what was going on behind closed doors. And my wife, well, she needed to understand that she couldn't get away with destroying everything we had. I wasn't going to let them ruin me and get away with it. So I took the next step. I sent the evidence I'd gathered to his wife. I didn't know her, but I knew she deserved the truth. She deserved to know what kind of man her husband really was. And as for my wife, well, I wasn't done with her yet. She had to face the reality of what she had done, the pain she had caused. I wasn't going to be the one begging for her to come back. Instead, I focused on making sure she knew what it felt like to lose everything, just as I had. What happened next was inevitable. Her boss's life came crashing down. His career, his reputation, it all unraveled. My wife, she was left to deal with the fallout. The guilt, the shame, it consumed her. I didn't get the satisfaction of seeing her beg for my forgiveness anymore. I didn't care about her apologies. She had already destroyed everything. Now it was my turn to make sure they both paid. I was ruthless, but I didn't feel bad. This was the price they had to pay for betraying me, for shattering my world. The anger I'd been carrying around for so long was finally being released. I had taken control of the situation, and I felt like I had regained a small piece of power. But the emptiness inside me, the hurt, it didn't go away. Revenge didn't heal the pain, it just gave me something to focus on. And in the end, maybe that was enough for now. In the weeks that followed, things started to settle into a strange kind of silence. The chaos that had consumed me began to fade, replaced by a hollow sense of victory. I'd taken my revenge. Her boss had been exposed, his career shattered, his family torn apart. My wife, well, she'd been left with the wreckage of what we once had. I watched as everything she had built with me unraveled before her eyes, and there was no satisfaction in it. The anger I had felt, the drive to destroy them, had faded into something far worse: emptiness. Even though I had gotten my revenge, I couldn't help but feel a sense of loss that gnawed at me every day. Revenge didn't fix anything. It didn't bring back the trust, the love, or the connection we once had. I'd watched my wife, once the woman I loved more than anything, slowly lose her sense of self in the aftermath of what had happened. She would try to apologize, to explain her actions, but nothing she said ever made a difference. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I could see it in her eyes, the shame, the regret, the way she couldn't face me anymore. She would still come by trying to talk, but every time it felt like more of a burden. She wanted forgiveness, but I couldn't give it to her. It was impossible. The trust had been shattered beyond repair. And maybe deep down I didn't want to forgive her. Maybe I didn't want to fix something that had been broken in such a cruel and final way. I had spent so many years giving my all to this marriage, and she had thrown it all away for a few moments of pleasure, for the twisted thrill of an affair with her boss. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. It wasn't just the physical betrayal, it was the emotional one. She had lied to me for so long, and I couldn't forget that. Even if she was sorry, even if she wanted to try to rebuild what we had, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I couldn't go back to a life that no longer felt real. It was like a veil had been lifted, and I could see everything for what it truly was. The love we shared, the life we built, had all been a facade. A lie. As for her boss, he had tried to fight back, of course. He had tried to salvage whatever reputation he had left, but it was too late. His marriage had ended in an explosive confrontation, and his career was irreparably damaged. The people he had once relied on for support had turned their backs on him. No one wanted to be associated with a man like that anymore. He had underestimated me, thought he could keep his secret hidden, while using his position of power to get what he wanted. But in the end, he had lost everything. The aftermath was strange. I didn't feel like a victor. Revenge had made me feel powerful for a brief moment, but in the long run, it had only left me with a deep sense of sorrow. I wasn't sure what to do with myself anymore. I had destroyed everything, but what had I gained in the process? My marriage was over, my trust was gone, and though I had gotten back at her, it felt like I had lost something far more important in the process. I tried to move on. I spent more time with friends, focused on work, anything to distract myself from the growing emptiness inside. I told myself that eventually time would heal the wounds, that I would find peace. But deep down, I knew I'd never forget what happened. I would never be able to look at relationships the same way again. I wasn't the same person I had been before this all started. It had changed me, and no amount of time or distraction could ever take away the scars. I had learned the hard way that sometimes revenge doesn't bring the closure you expect. It only leaves you with more questions, more doubts, and more hurt. And in the end, it's not the people who betray you that suffer the most, it's you.